I call this meeting to order.
Of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Le comité se réunit sur...
The committee is meeting on its study of government measures to protect and promote French in Quebec and in Canada. This is the first sitting for this study. Madam Clerk, are there any replacements or anyone participating in person, please? No one is participating in the room today, and Mr. Scarpaleggia is replacing Ms. Lalonde, and Mr. Mazier is once again replacing Mr. Williamson today. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome.
I would like to outline a few words to follow. Pour ceux et celles qui participent à la réunion à distance, je voudrais profiter...
For those that participating virtually, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. And this fact was mentioned by Speaker Rota on September 29th, 2020.
May speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice of the bottom of your screen or either floor, English or French. Avant de prendre la parole,
before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. And when you are done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize any interference.
All comments by members or witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Lorsque vous parlez,
when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly.
Exceptional circumstances, the use of the headset with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Signaler tout problème technique.
Should any technical challenges arise, please advise the chair. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes to ensure all members can participate fully.
Participating in person, bon, on sait qu'il n'y en a pas. Donc, nous allons maintenant tout de suite.
So, right away, we will welcome our witnesses. I would like to begin by welcoming the warmest, wishing the warmest of welcomes to our witnesses. For your opening statements, you have 7.5 minutes, followed by a question period with committee members. And I use a yellow card to let you know when you have 1 minute of the 7.5 minutes left, and I'll use the red card to show you that your time is up. Our witnesses this afternoon, and I hope I will get their names right, are Mr. Éric Labelle-Estaut. He is Professor and Director of the International Observatory for Language Rights at the University of Moncton Faculty of Law. And he is representing the New Brunswick French-Speaking Jurists Association. And from Impératif Français, French Imperative, we have Jean-Paul Perrault, President, and François Côté, lawyer. Having introduced our witnesses, I will invite Mr. Éric Labelle-Estaut to begin for his 7.5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? Very well. Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you. Mr. Chair, honorable committee members, first I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify during your important work on the future of language rights in Canada. I would also like to say that it's very pleasant to see you all via camera. It's very different from the courses I've been teaching when students have their cameras off. So as a jurist, my comments will focus on the legal aspects of the themes selected by the committee under its November 24th, 2020 resolution. I would like to briefly address these three themes. First, the respective roles of the federal and provincial governments regarding language issues from a constitutional point of view. Second, the relationship between the concept of equality and that of asymmetry. And thirdly, the approach that Parliament should take to supervising federal businesses. First, it is important to highlight that language as a field of jurisdiction falls under both federal and provincial jurisdiction. Each level of government has the power to legislate on the language matters that relate to that level's subject matter jurisdiction. The Constitution imposes specific obligations on federal governments or provincial governments when it comes to protecting the French language. It follows that language planning or development is not and cannot be the responsibility of one level of government alone. And the proof is the subsection 16.3 of the Charter, which calls on Parliament as well as provincial legislatures to legislate in order to advance the equality of English and French in Canadian society. The matter of the principle of equality of official languages, and in particular the matter of asymmetry, has come up often in recent debates on the modernization of the OLA. So I feel it is worth specifying certain points on this topic. First of all, there can be no doubt that French and English are asymmetrical on the sociological level. English has an enormous power of attraction, which is due in part to its proportional weight. This ensures that Francophone communities, no matter whether they are minority or majority within their province, have to devote much more effort than Anglophone communities in order to maintain themselves and be able to thrive. This sociological difference leads some to say that the principle of equality enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Official Languages Act end up disadvantaging the French language instead of supporting it, because given the requirement to treat both in an identical way. This is a mistake. We must bear in mind that the official languages system was put in place to strengthen the French language and to protect Francophones, who were clearly disadvantaged. The English language needs no law to protect it. While the Official Languages Act is based on a principle of equality between English and French, its very existence stems from and demonstrates the recognition of the fact that French and English are unequal. The principle of linguistic equality, as defined by the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism, and as recognized by the courts, seeks to give Francophone communities the capacity to be maintained and to flourish in spite of the existing sociological asymmetry. It is therefore a principle of real rather than formal equality. Unlike formal equality, real equality requires that the state take into account the asymmetries between the two linguistic communities and that it sometimes apply different standards to each. Indeed, the case law on language rights does systematically take into account the sociological asymmetry between English and French. For example, in the Ford decision, which dealt with the requirements for signage contained in the Charter of the French Language, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized the fragility of the French language and recognized that the Government of Quebec has a special role to play to protect it. Also, decisions dealing with Section 23 of the Charter, in particular the Solski decision, which deals with bridging schools, stress that this provision must be interpreted while taking into account the individual context of each community. Section 23 itself is asymmetrically applied in Quebec because of an explicit exception in the 1982 Constitution Act. It follows that if Parliament wishes to take further steps to promote and protect French as a vulnerable language, it can do so within the framework of the current system and without departing from its fundamental principles. For the past few months, debates surrounding the promotion of French have been fueled by the suggestion that Parliament should pass legislation to subject federal businesses located in Quebec to the Charter of the French Language. However, insofar as the objective of such a law would be to guarantee French-speaking workers the right to work in their language without discrimination, and to guarantee the public's right to be served in French, it is neither necessary nor desirable to abandon the framework of the current regime. Parliament could easily achieve this result by subjecting federal businesses to the OLA. On the other hand, an approach modeled on the Charter of the French language would have the following significant disadvantages. First, such an approach would only target Quebec. If that were the case, Parliament would be straying significantly from the federal government's basic linguistic obligations. When the official languages system was developed, the territorial model was explicitly rejected, like the territorial model used in Switzerland, where language rights are defined based on province. Instead, in Canada, a mixed model was adopted in which the same rights are accorded to all francophones across the country, contingent on the criterion of numbers at the local level. And given this principle, it would be difficult to justify a law that grants rights to francophones in Montreal, but not to those in Moncton or Sudbury. Second, legislation that directly replicates the wording of the Charter of the French language, like some bills introduced in the past, might conflict with Section 16(1) of the Charter. The Charter of the French language is based on the principle of primacy of the French language, and this is reflected in the wording of the rights it confers. However, a federal statute that repeats the same wording could be challenged under Section 16 of the Charter, as it would grant rights to French that it does not grant to English. On the other hand, Parts 4 and 5 of the Official Languages Act essentially provide the same rights to francophones as the Charter of the French language does, but without establishing a hierarchy between French and English. Through this lens, our organization welcomes Minister Joly's recent proposals. However, it will be necessary to take into account the bill that will be tabled. I would like to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to testify, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Lebel-Estaut. If you could please send us your notes, we will be able to share them with our analysts. We will now move on to a 6-minute question period with each member.
Monsieur Blaney.
And we will begin with Mr. Blaney for the next 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. I would like to say that perhaps we are good students. We have been listening very attentively to your presentation. I can assure you of that. Here's my question, and you might wish to restate what you said. There were 2 points you made in your speech to us. You said that there is no doubt on the sociological level that the country is asymmetrical. One moment, Chair. Yes, indeed. I've just noticed, Mr. Blaney, I'm very sorry, but we have 3 witnesses. So I am terribly sorry. We will rather move on to the next witness, and then we will get back to you and your questions as soon as possible. Very good. I will be pleased to listen. Thank you. And for Impératif, we have Mr. Perrault and Mr. Côté.
C'est pas lequel des deux souhaite commencer. Vous aussi, 7 minutes.
Not sure which of them prefers to begin. You have 7 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais...
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. I would like to check something. Go ahead, Mr. Godin. Have we received the speaking notes for this afternoon's witnesses? I know we hadn't received Mr. Labelle's, but have we received Impératif Française speaking notes? I would like to ask the clerk. Madam Clerk? I can answer that question. As you know, all documents sent to the committee must be sent in both official languages. Therefore, until those documents have been translated, I am not able to distribute them. So we will have them translated, and then we will send them to committee members. Thank you very much for that clarification. For the next 7.5 minutes, go ahead, Mr. Perrault and Mr. Côté. Good day, everyone. So, I will be taking the floor since it seems there are technical difficulties with the president, François Côté. So, Mr. Chair and committee members and everyone listening in, good day. It is an honor for me to appear before the committee, and I shout out to Mr. Perrault and to Impératif Français. I would like to give 5 clear, simple points that the federal government could adopt to tangibly contribute to stemming the decline of French in Quebec. And the price should not be too high. It's only for the government to have the political will to take action. We have written these out in detail in the 60-page brief that we sent to the committee on February 5th. We included models of legislative amendments that the government could implement. We decided to orient our recommendations around 3 points. Mr. Côté, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you please slow down? Because you are being interpreted at the same time. Thank you very much. That's the challenge of my life. So our proposals all are guided by one theme: asymmetrical individual equality, which is a vision of the federal government, is only a false or a facade of bilingualism, and this is being discussed in Quebec. Linguistic rights must be protected in the Quebec nation because French is the nation's official language. In our opinion, the vision of the federal vision of French and English is like the clay pot and the iron pot. It is a false equality, that is to say. The French language should receive special increased protection given the North American reality, but also given the fact that French's reality is not a reality only within Quebec. We can see the reality of French from history and from today's reality. So, we propose to extend the Charter of the French language to private businesses under federal jurisdiction. For example, in aviation and telecommunications, to help Quebec workers earn a living. This right is already protected in the rest of the private sector in Quebec. Another simple point would be for Ottawa to allow the Quebec National Assembly to act alone, which would be constitutionally feasible based on the double aspect, which is part of the Constitution. Alternately, the federal government could also extend rights itself. For example, by going through the Canada Labour Code, allowing French to remain the sole official language of legislation in Quebec. We remain firm that amending the Official Languages Act would perhaps be unadvisable because this act is aimed around the public service, and it could lead to legislative inconsistencies. Reinforcing the flawed federal vision of bilingualism would perpetuate existing problems. The piece of legislation that works very well is the Charter of the French language in Quebec. using the territorial approach, the Charter of the French language would be the most legitimate model to use for business regulation. Another proposal would be to amend the Official Languages Act in order to establish a special protection regime for the right to communicate and work in French in the public service in Quebec and in the National Capital Region. This would allow workers to participate fully according to sections 44 and 45 of the Charter, whether this is at the hiring stage or while carrying out their duties. To ensure effective and true guarantee of federal language rights in Quebec, action must be taken, and we saw a high percentage of Quebecers were suffering from linguistic insecurity. Once again, the Charter of the French language is our preferred model. And our third and last proposal, and after that I will be pleased to answer your questions, would be to reopen the Constitution Act and to go back to a prior version of it, to turn the page on the decision by the Supreme Court 40 years ago in order to enable Quebec to make its only official language of legislation French, where Quebec will have a legislative obligation, and nearby, Ontario will be able to carry out its legislative duties in English with translation towards French. This will have a strong impact also on immigration. And a very short parenthesis to explain. Our interventions are only concerned with the situation in Quebec and have nothing to do with Francophones outside of Quebec. We share their concerns, but we are only here to speak to Quebec. Thank you very much, Mr. Cote. We will continue.
And we'll be moving into the question period. So, dear committee members, given that you know it is up to me to manage our time and our clock, we will now hear from the members, from the MPs, for 5 minutes. Mr. Blaney, please, you can begin. Thank you, Chair. And perhaps I'll skip my short introduction. Very interesting. We've had 2 witnesses telling us about 2 versions of an issue, sometimes contradictory. I'm turning to you, Mr. Isto, on this issue. You recognize a sociological asymmetry. And this shows that the legislation, as it now stands, hasn't managed to reach its objectives. So what should we do about this? And perhaps I could put the same question to Mr. Cote. Well, Mr. Blaney, thank you for the question. And here's my answer. To begin with, the Supreme Court's decisions are quite clear in this matter. The asymmetry between the 2 cultures and languages must be taken into account in interpreting current legislation. The creation of linguistic rights, as we see them today, aimed to protect French more particularly. So these rights were developed first and foremost to protect the French language and the equality of French speakers. Therefore, criticizing it on grounds of symmetry or apparent surface symmetry is just missing the point that this legislation was adopted with a specific aim and that it has been interpreted with that in mind. So I don't have any overall approach to suggest to you other than saying that on a case-by-case basis, the matter of how to see to it that the needs of each community are respected must be evaluated based on the context. Let me be a little more concrete. We know that our committee has often spoken to the issues of minorities outside of Quebec, but now we see that there are minorities that have been neglected for decades. And I'm speaking about the very heart of Quebec francophonie, the minority of Quebec itself within Canada. Let me now turn to Mr. Cote. Mr. Cote, we're hearing sometimes that no, the legislation is fine, nothing to be changed. Now, you are putting forward an asymmetric approach. How should that be approached in Quebec? I would like to hear you on how this change could be brought about in order to expand the effect of the Official Languages Act such that it really include the minority of Quebecers within the North American context. The answer is simple. The Official Languages Act does not seem to be the right tool to use to protect the linguistic rights of Quebec society, which is, in the majority, a Francophone society. The model in which the Official Languages Act was drawn up might be advantageous in certain regards. Let's say in communities which are in a minority situation on their territories, demographically speaking, but it can't really protect the majority in a specific territory, which is nevertheless a minority within the entire country. To better protect the linguistic rights of the Quebecers who are a minority within the Federation, it seems to me that we should have greater deference to the Quebec National Assembly and to a territorial approach to rights within Quebec. That should be adopted. The territorial model would be the right model to adopt. Here we can see that Quebec does have challenges with regard to education, to say the least. Last question for Mr. Labellisto. You have suggested federal entities on provincial territories, and about them you say they should be legislated under federal laws. So is this the approach that you would use to ensure that employees of federal institutions under federal jurisdiction should work in French everywhere? Yes, I think this is the approach we should adopt. This is the approach used for federal services. The services are not necessarily available everywhere across the country, but only in regions where there is a real demand for them. I think that we should also look at private sector services to see what sort of distribution they have over the country and what approach should be adopted, but it should resemble what's already used at the federal level. Thank you, Chair. I think this brings my time to an end. Thank you very much. We will now hear from Mr. Arsenault. You have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair. I would have liked to speak to President Perrault. Is he still with us? No, I don't think so. I think he has a technical problem, unfortunately, keeping him from us. Very well, then. Mr. Cote, I'm sure that given my accent, my family name, and where I'm from, you must understand that I'm one of the Francophones, Canadian Francophones outside of Quebec, and we've had a good 400 years of history of fighting assimilation to hang on to our language. And we received recently the Quebec Vice President of the Alliance for Quebec, Mr. Maillet, who shared something with me, and I would like to tell you about it so that we could talk about it. He told us that in a meeting of upper management, there were 10 people around a table. This is their federal managers, and 9 out of 10 of them were Francophones, most of them from Quebec, and the chair of the committee was a French-speaking Quebecoise. Simultaneous interpretation was provided. Basically, everything you would expect to support linguistic rights very proactively there. There was only one single person who was an Anglophone, and the chair, Mr. Barrière, who's the person who was telling us about this, said that despite all of this, everyone spoke in English, despite the fact that there were interpreters there, such that the interpreters were interpreting what the Francophones said in English 9 out of 10 times, and the interpreters were actually interpreting into their mother tongue. So, You see, this is the sort of thing that we've seen here ourselves, and this was quite heavily biased here. 9 out of 10, there was no requirement that everyone speak English. There was only one single English-only speaker. So how is this the case? Well, if this were a mere anecdote, but unfortunately it isn't. This is the sort of thing we hear of very often, unfortunately. This is a fact of the matter. The asymmetric, or rather the symmetric equality of right and status of the two languages is a superficial one. A superficial equality, which provides for French being an option, yes, equally optional, but that's about it. Excuse me, I have only 5 minutes, so I will interrupt you. So this is a very clear example that I've given you, and you've said that one of the documents that we've received, Impératif Français, you're telling us that the Official Languages Act is, and I quote you, is greatly responsible for assimilation, or rather for the decline of the use of French in Quebec. I'm giving you an example of these Quebecers, 9 out of 10 of them, whose mother tongue is French, and there was no reason, there was no pressure being put on them. They were not being coerced in any way to speak English around this table. So how is it that you can say that it's the Official Languages Act that has failed them? Well, as you've said, this is just one more example showing that we are up against a culture that applies this passive pressure. It's an institutional culture to the effect that English is the language of business, of success. It's the dominant language that is naturally to be adopted as soon as there's any sort of even symmetric equality before the law. And why is this within the Official Language Act? Well, because there's no superior extra protection for French, for being able to work in and carry out one's career in French in the public service. Yes, but I seem to think this is a contradiction. I certainly share your concern about the decline of French within North America and even within Quebec. But here, there was no urgency. There was no coercion. No one was forcing anyone to speak in anything but their mother tongue. You are quite right. And this is deplorable. Yes, but what is the explanation? What's the right explanation for this behavior? It's not. Look, what I'm saying is that, and look, do you agree that it's not by protecting, by regulation, linguistic rights? That's not where the fault lies. No, it's that the protection is not strong enough to take into account the actual context, the real context of North America. All right. I put this question to Quebecers, people who are, at least compared to I, are immersed in a French culture much more than I have been or than I am. So are you saying that even Bill 101 has failed in Quebec? May I answer, or are we out of time? 15 seconds, please, Mr. Côté. All right. Bill 101 tries to live up to expectations. Unfortunately, it's shot down by a lot of jurisprudence that we'll have to deal with at the provincial level. But yes, it's made a good deal of progress, and we have made progress thanks to Bill 101. Thank you, Mr. Côté. I've seen Mr. Labelle Isto's hand go up. You will have a chance to speak. There will be other questions, I'm sure, and you'll have a chance to slip what you had to say in then. For the next 5 minutes, we will hear from Mr. Beaulieu. Microphone, please. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Well, so you are stating that the federal government's official language policy is based on an individualistic and symmetrical view concept based on individual linguistic rights, whereas your approach is based on a territorial approach. So you would need this asymmetric territorial approach to really allow for Bill 101 to bear fruit. My way of thinking is that linguistic accommodation around the world, everywhere that we see a more territorial approach, Belgium, Switzerland, there isn't an assimilative force of a majority over a minority, whereas that's quite different in Canada. We do have assimilation here. So everywhere where bilingualism is individual and symmetrical, there is assimilation. So is this sort of what you're saying? I would say yes, indeed, that you've pointed out the difference. There are studies that have been carried out around the world now using official languages in the UN, for example, where several languages are held to be equal and everyone gets to choose which they will speak. That has nevertheless led to a systematic domination by the English language at the European Council, at the UN in the United States, and so on, where English is spoken 70% of the time. Even though right now, of course, the United Kingdom isn't even part of Europe. So allowing everyone to choose which language they would like always favors English. This is a fact of the matter, especially in North America. So I quite agree with your understanding of the situation. And this is why the territorial model must be adopted and have ascendancy, and why the federal lawmakers must use the approach adopted in Quebec and really ensure that the spirit of the protection of the French fact takes effect in anything under federal jurisdiction as well as in constitutional law. To go back to the example of the vice president of the Alliance of Public Servants of Quebec, which is who we were speaking of a little earlier, who has told us that very often documents and even conferences are carried out solely in English. I think that that is also a matter of habit, isn't it? Every time we're in touch with people outside Quebec, I mean, several Quebec federal civil servants have told us that it's really difficult to work in French once they're outside of Quebec. So you're suggesting a model that would ensure that both at the federal level and within Quebec, we would be able to ensure that people can work in French. I'm not sure whether you could tell us a bit more about this, but, you know, actual measures that you would suggest. I don't think that it's easy to push off English when it's available. So what means do you suggest? Mr. Joliette was suggesting something. What are your suggestions, your concrete suggestions?
Hello.
Well, can you hear me now? Yes? With respect to the measures, I can't say anything about what Ms. Joly might propose, but having read the press releases, well, we're waiting to see the content. Regarding concrete measures that could be adopted, I come back to the Charter of the French Language, sections 44 and 45, provide effective and efficient guarantees of the right to work in French in the workplace. So nothing will prevent people from using their other language as well, but this is a good guarantee. So we would suggest 3 changes, 3 amendments that would integrate the Charter of the French language into the Official Languages Act so that there would be recourse to the courts using that, not just to the Official Languages Commissioner. It would be possible to take this to use the courts, and this would really protect the federal public servants in the National Capital Region and in Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu and Mr. Côté. So we will now go to Mr. Boulakis for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Boulakis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses, Mr. Labelle-Isto, Mr. Côté. Thank you for being there. I'll start with Mr. Côté. The Liberals and Minister Joly have been talking up the possible future modernization of the Official Languages Act. We were expecting a bill, but we're going to have this document that's going to lead to a committee and maybe legislation. So for 5 years, we haven't had a modernization. But do you think that this is election nearing, last-minute campaigning by a government? Absolutely, completely. This is a tactic that is just a delaying tactic. They're just delaying this for the future. They said there will be a committee and maybe then legislation and so on. There was a study at the University of Moncton that looked at how many times the Trudeau government talked about updating the legislation, and I think it was 150 times they talked about a white paper and on and on. So I think they just want to kick this down the road after the elections, and I want to raise this to all committees, all committee members. It would be vital for all the parties in Ottawa to express clearly in concrete terms their proposals before the election. It should not go until after the election. Thank you, Mr. Cote. The NDP has always supported giving Quebec workers in businesses under federal jurisdiction, having them have the same rights as those that are outside that context. So I realize that you don't necessarily, Mr. Labelle or Mr. Labelle Isto, I want to ask you a question. You talked about the need for coherence, having employees be able to use their first language in the workplace. Could you please elaborate on that? You're muted. Thank you, Mr. Boulakis. I want to make the connection with my work as a lawyer. I was part of the team representing Mr. Dion, who worked in the financial services area, who is still working to defend his right to work in French. The Treasury Board and the Department of Justice adopted a very restrictive definition of the rights under Section Part 5 of the Official Languages Act with respect to the language of work, and this was done long ago. Now, Mr. Justice Bastarache ruled on this and indicated that these rights were being interpreted too restrictively. If Parliament wants to act on this, it needs to better define the wording in the Act to support the right to work in one's preferred language, because those rights need to be protected, the ones that are being advocated for by Impératif Français. I don't have much more time. Do you believe that the additional powers proposed by Ms. Joly for the Commissioner of Official Languages will be effective? I think that this represents some progress. The federal court does have the right to impose damages, other financial penalties, but it doesn't go far enough. I think that Parliament should give the Commissioner a clear mandate in that regard. Thank you, Mr. Boulakis. Thank you, Mr. Labelle Isto. I saw Mr. Cote's hand. He wanted to speak, but that's all the time we have for this round. So I hope that he will be able to speak during the next round. We will now go to Mr. Williamson for 4 minutes, please. Mr. Williamson, you have the floor. Mr. Chairman, I think that with respect to the round of questions, Mr. Williamson isn't there, but I would like to take the question and I will share my time with Mr. Dalton. Mr. Chairman, I want to come back to my NDP colleague's comment about the importance of the official languages than the French language, I think that we need to highlight the importance of French. And as you said very clearly, Mr. Cote, I think that we should have very clear positions from each party before the election. I think that the NDP, for example, should be asked what it will do within 100 days of the election to protect language rights in Quebec, but not only in Quebec, the minority language rights as well. Now, Mr. Cote, you talked about a symmetrical system, but we're here in a federal context. And of course, there are a number of territories, and you are in favor of a territorial approach. Now, in Quebec, in that territory, French is the majority language. But the goal of our study is to promote French in Quebec and across the country. So I would like to call on you to be more open to go outside the Quebec context so that we could work together to promote the language rather than to isolate our thinking to one territory. I prefer to see the broader context and to promote French across Canada. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I appreciate your openness. And there's a connection with Mr. Boulukis' question. The reason that we promoted our proposals and talked about the Quebec territory is because that is our priority. We have nothing against extending our proposals to other parts of Canada, from New Brunswick to Manitoba. The measures that we are proposing would be applicable to the federal jurisdiction, to Quebec, but of course, analogous proposals could be implemented in other parts of Canada. There are provincial distinctions across the country, and therefore we should have a distinct approach. Quebec is the seat of Francophone culture in Canada, where it is the majority language, but we have nothing at all against the idea of measures that will better protect French across the country. Thank you. How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry, you have 45 seconds. I'll give my 2 minutes that I still have to my colleague, Mr. Dalton. You have 40 seconds, Mr. Dalton. Well, thank you, Mr. Cote. I appreciate your strong and clear proposals. You are calling. You talked about the fact that we hear a lot of rhetoric, but it always gets kicked down the road when it comes to concrete action. We want to see legislation before we go into an election. And that's the issue that we have. If you have a 10-second answer, you can give it, but the time is basically up. Well, I have nothing against Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Joly, but we should see action before the next election. Thank you, Mr. Cote. 4 minutes now to Terry Duguid. Go ahead, please.
Apologize because my computer crashed. I had to reboot and get back in. Good to see everyone again. I think my question would be directed at Mr. Lebel-Easto, and 2 of the members of this committee are from Manitoba, which I've said many times. This committee has a very vibrant and historic Francophone community that has, of course, been here for centuries. evidence that French is in decline in Western Canada, across Western Canada, a shortage of French teachers, a shortage of spots for being educated in the French language. And of course, this compromises communities' constitutional right to education in the minority language. And communities are having to resort to the courts to assert their rights. I wonder if you might expand on your reading of the white paper released by Minister Joly not too long ago, and whether you see an improvement in that vein where communities do not have to resort to the courts, and what advice might you have to keep us out of the courts for these communities to realize their constitutional rights?
Thank you, Mr. Duguid. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. With respect, so one comment which is positive in relation to the white paper is that the government for the first time is clearly and openly recognizing the importance of institutions to the survival and development of minority language communities in Canada. And that's a point that minorities have been litigating in the courts for 40 years. And it's a welcome development to see the federal government commit to supporting it. And I think in future, if there's any hope of reversing the trends that you noted in your comments, it is going to have to go through substantial investment in developing minority community institutions, which are the spaces within which a language lives. And if it doesn't have those spaces, the language will simply die out. With respect to keeping out of the courts, I would say that governments could start by implementing their obligations in a spirit of generosity, and rather than adopting the restrictive interpretations that their departments of justice propose to them. I would recommend that if Parliament wants to help communities avoid that kind of a problem, it could try to minimize ambiguity in the law and legislate clear obligations when it comes to developing minority community institutions, although I realize that's a challenge because you want the obligations imposed to be adaptable from one context to another. You might also consider reversing the burden of proof when it comes to the judicial process in litigating language rights issues. Right now, if somebody thinks that their rights have been violated under the Act, they file a complaint, the commissioner prepares a report, but then if they feel like they need to turn to the courts to the issue, to solve the issue because the institution is refusing to comply, they then have to build a case in federal court. One thing that you might consider is creating a reversal where if there is a report from the commissioner concluding that there has been a breach, that it is up to the institution to challenge that finding in court rather than to individual citizens who often don't have a lot of means with which to do so.
And maybe a quick comment from Mr. Cote.
Yes, in 15 seconds, please.
15 seconds, precisely. Well, the Charter of the French language is actually does that and imposes a burden of proof on the employer to prove that there is a necessity to speak in English, to alleviate the burden on any plaintiff to have to prove that his language rights were infringed. And by transposing the legal regime of the Charter of the French language into the federal legislation, it would achieve precisely that objective.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cote. Merci, Monsieur Duguid. Donc, pour les...
Thank you both. And for the next 2 minutes, Mr. Beaulieu has the floor. On the one hand, we're hearing that the Official Languages Act could be adapted to satisfy Quebec's requests, but at the same time, the territorial model, which Quebec is trying to put in place, would be to make French the common language in the workplace for integration and in Quebec. And that is not the objective of the Official Languages Act, which proposes to provide free choice in a model of bilingualism. But that would be impossible in the rest of Canada, because in the rest of Canada, Francophones are by far the minority. Now, I believe that the Bill 101 is the priority because it aims for French as a common language. It doesn't focus on bilingualism. There's no need for people to integrate towards French or towards English. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Cote? Well, in 1 minute, I would say that I absolutely agree with what you say, and that is at the heart of the propositions we're putting to the House of Commons. We think that a territorial model is absolutely needed to give a distinctive status to French in Quebec. We propose it in Quebec. Nothing stops it from being imposed elsewhere. But at least for Quebec, French must be the common language. It's not a question of individual claims. It is on our territory where we need to absolutely be capable of defending this minority language. We must move away from this spirit of bilingualism that is symmetrical. We need to espouse an asymmetrical territorial model. That is the only real way to respect language rights in Quebec. Can I make a comment, Mr. Chair? In 10 seconds only. Great. I just wanted to say that I think Mr. Cote is championing a rather utopic vision. I worked in Montreal, and I can tell you, and as Mr. Arsenault said earlier, this atmosphere is very present in private businesses, so I disagree with Mr. Cote on that. Thank you very much. Mr. Boulris, you have the floor for the next 2 minutes. Go ahead. Mr. Boulris? Oh, here I am. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's easy to see here that there are two opposing visions with our two witnesses we're welcoming today. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly normal. But I'm pleased to see both witnesses agree on one thing, that they agree on the asymmetry of these two languages. And I think that all of us together should be able to take that concept and build on it for the upcoming report. Mr. Labelle-Isto, we saw the minister's white paper and her proposals. Now, regarding workers outside of Quebec, who are nonetheless francophones, something was mentioned. A high concentration of francophones based on region. Some people were concerned by this. Mr. Arsenault mentioned Acadian and francophone artists in New Brunswick. They want for New Brunswick to be separated into smaller regions to improve rights for francophones in certain regions. I just have a minute left, Mr. Labelle-Isto. What could you put on the table to ensure the maximum respect of minority language workers? Thank you, Mr. Boulris. Regarding workers, I believe that, to begin with, the federal government could draw inspiration from the existing public service program. There are regions, for example, bilingual regions. Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead, Mr. Labelle-Isto. Workers can work either in English or French, depending on their choice. I believe that that system could be adapted so that private businesses could use it. The system is already in place. I don't see why we would reinvent the wheel. We would be concerned if the federal government proposed only to guarantee those rights in regions that are majority francophone, because that would exclude a very important or a very large part of Canadian francophonie. That's all the time that we have. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Go ahead, Mr. Arsenault. Could we please remind our witnesses, if they have any extra information they would like to share with us, for them not to hesitate, and we would be very pleased to receive that information as a committee. Very good. Please do send that information on to our clerk. Point of order, Mr. Beaulieu? Mr. Beaulieu, your microphone is not activated. Oh, yes, Mr. Perrault seems to have joined the meeting. I'm not sure if he'll be able to take the floor. Well, in fact, we have another panel of witnesses waiting for us, and we will have to move on to the sound tests. And for that reason, since we are closing now, I'd like to say Mr. Éric Labelle-Isto, Mr. François Côté, and Mr. Jean-Paul Perrault, who unfortunately we couldn't hear from. I want to thank you sincerely on behalf of all committee members. Your testimony was very important for this committee and for the report. I would like to thank Éric Labelle-Isto, professor and director at the International Observatory for Language Rights at the University of Moncton Faculty of Law, representing the New Brunswick French-Speaking Jurists Association. And from Impératif Français, we have Mr. François Côté, lawyer, and we also have the president, Jean-Paul Perrault, who wasn't able to be with us because of technical difficulties. And I would invite you to send in briefs because we are just starting this study. And on that note, thank you, everyone. And we will now suspend to test sound for the next panel of witnesses. Thank you very much.
Very well. The committee returns to its study after having heard a first group this morning. Today, the committee is meeting on its study, Government Measures to Protect and Promote French in Quebec and Canada. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses.
Of the witnesses. Avant de prendre la parole, s'il vous plaît.
Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. And members will tell you to whom they're addressing their question.
Addressed through the chair. Les services d'interprétation offerts pour cette vidéoconférence.
We are offering interpretation services in this video conferences, much as we do in regular committee meetings. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either the floor, English or French.
Slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. J'aimerais maintenant accueillir.
I would now like to welcome our witnesses. After the ones we heard earlier this afternoon, actually, you will have 7.5 minutes each for your opening remarks, followed by rounds of questions. As usual, I will give you this image showing you have 1 minute left and this showing you that your time is through. As witnesses then, we have now as an individual the Honourable Serge Joyal, jurist and former senator. And from the Quebec Community Groups Network, we have the Honourable Marlene Jennings, who is the president of the ASSOSTAT network. And we also have the Director General of the network, Sylvia Martin-Laforge. Very well. I'm not sure who would like to begin. But given that I spoke of Mr. Joyal, Honourable Serge Joyal, you have 7 minutes to address us, sir. 7.5 minutes, please, sir. Microphone on, please. Can you hear me well, Mr. Dubourg? Very well, sir. Go ahead. Thank you for having invited me to appear before you. I will try to use my 7 minutes as effectively and efficiently as possible. I would like to thank you for having invited me to appear before you this afternoon, because I've had personal experience over 45 years of the nature of official languages legislation in Canada, beginning in 1966 when I undertook a case before the Honourable Judge Jules Deschênes in Quebec against Air Canada, which at the time was a Crown corporation, in order to allow its employees to work in French, and especially to obtain an injunction to ensure that Air Canada publish all its manuals in French as well as English to ensure that people could work effectively in French. Then I launched the creation of the Committee of Official Languages, and you are the honourable members of it now, by launching in 1971 legislation with a colleague to create the committee itself. I also started the program of court challenges against sections of the Charter which did not provide for adequate protection of French and that were changed. And I also was involved in protecting the Montfort Hospital in Ottawa. I won't give you details. I think that you remember the situation well. And I also got involved in 1988 with the president of the Treasury Board. Given cuts of the then government, Francophone communities were asked to bear the brunt of these cuts. In fact, all other government groups were, except for Indigenous groups. There was an exception for Indigenous groups, but there were no exceptions made for minority language communities at that time, and I intervened to ensure that that be changed. And finally, I made for the amendment at Part 7 of the Official Languages Act in 2005 with my colleague, Jean Gauthier, also of the Senate, who has now left us. We ensured that debate occurred and had Part 7 adopted. And I'll get back to that later. And then in 2007, I helped avoid the abolition of the Courts Challenges program by the then government and supported the Federation of Francophones and Acadians that were about to take the government to court to deal with the demise of the court challenge system. And then I was involved in the Senate Committee of Official Languages. And in 2017-2018, I launched a Supreme Court case to ensure that Section 55 of the Constitutional Act 19 be translated officially into English, the Constitution Act. We are now before the courts on this matter. So on the basis of all this experience, I hope I will live up to your expectations this afternoon. And again, thank you for asking me to appear here. And I hope that your questions will allow me to delve into a number of the questions that I will briefly lay out before you now. Let us say clearly then, for all, that my first point is about immigration. we must ensure that we have a stable group of French-speaking immigrants, and this is essential to ensure that the Francophone language maintain its vitality in Canada. A critical mass of Francophones entering Canada. Why? Because in Quebec, and as you know, I'm a Quebecer, the birth rate is insufficient to ensure the survival of the population. We have an annual net loss of population unless we use immigration to change the situation as well. Quebec is the most quickly aging population, and we're almost aging as quickly as Japan is. The statistics show that by 1920 or 30, 25% of Quebecers will be 75 years of age or older. And a large percentage of the 25% rather, and that population will have no longer be actively on the labor market. And this is very important. I refer you to the article in the Devoir of yesterday. The Quebec Institut de la Statistique concluded that immigrants occupy 12.2% of jobs in Quebec. That was 10 years ago, but that now they occupy 18% of the jobs. So about 250,000 jobs have been taken up by immigrants, while jobs filled by people already in Quebec are down by 110,000. What does that mean? Well, it means that if we can't really count on immigration as a demographic resource, this ratio between Francophones or French speakers and English speakers in Quebec will continue to lead to a decline of the use of French. And so much so that in some regions there will be so little French that community and life in French will be very difficult to sustain. This is a very important issue to help us understand the dynamic that we're all in now as Quebecers and as Canadians when it comes to immigration. Thus, it is of the highest importance to ensure that people who wish to immigrate have access to training that is well-funded and available not solely for those who enter the workforce, but to their family as well and to all the members of families, to ensure that we rebalance the linguistic strength of both languages, which seems essential to the survival of our country. Also, very important to me, the discoverability of French works on digital platforms, their visibility. Young generations are submitted to French, are coerced into using French because of this little type of device I now have in my hand, an iPhone here, which is dominated by English. So the government must initiate measures to change this. Otherwise, whatever else we're doing here and there will not push back the omnipresence of English in all digital platforms. Thank you, Chair, and I will be very pleased to exchange further based on the questions that are put to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Joyal. This is quite a lot of important things to discuss you've suggested here. Let's go on now to the Quebec Community Groups Network for 7.5 minutes. Ladies, the microphone is all yours.
My name is Marlene Jennings, and I am the president of the Quebec Community Groups Network. Accompanied is Director General of the QCGN, Sylvia Martin-Laforge. For the past decade, the Government of Canada has been under pressure from official language minority communities to modernize the Official Languages Act. Led by the QCGN, English-speaking Quebecers have actively participated in numerous consultative processes, which led to Honorable Mélanie Joly's proposals last week on a way forward. The QCGN's brief on modernizing the Official Languages Act, which was submitted to this committee in November of 2018, was developed with the cooperation of a broad segment of the community sector serving English-speaking Quebec. We thank the organizations that took time to contribute. So what are English-speaking Quebec's expectations regarding a modernized act? Well, it remains that a central guiding principle of the Official Languages Act must be the equality of status of English and French. It must categorically guarantee this equality of status in all institutions subject to the Act across Canada. Now, we're fully aware that the term equality has specific legal meaning. That is why the QCGN understands and supports an approach to implementing federal commitments to Canada's English and French linguistic minority communities that is adapted to the specific content, context, and needs of different official language minority communities. We understand that French language requires special attention, and we acknowledge the data that demonstrates a national decline in the use of French and the demographic peril of Francophone minority communities. We've just heard from Senator Joyal some of that demographic reality. In the past, I have issued a statement shared with the members of this committee reaffirming our organization's commitment to respecting French as the official language of the province of Quebec and the ongoing work that we do to support and defend French in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. However, we reject the notion that in the federal sphere protecting and promoting French necessitates restricting the language rights of English-speaking Quebecers. Too often, our community is scapegoated or ignored. Enough of this. The majority of English-speaking Quebecers remained in Quebec after the turmoil of the 1970s. We call Quebec home, and we understand our responsibility to learn and use French in the public space. After all, it was a group of concerned parents, English parents from St. Lambert, who in the 1960s invented French immersion to ensure that our children could remain and be integrated into French-speaking Quebec. And we are so perplexed that our schools were not even mentioned in the government's plans to increase support for French immersion. Our community institutions, hospitals, libraries, post-secondary institutions serve all Quebecers, both in English and in French. After all, Jean-François Lisée famously learned English by joining a scout troop in Thetford Mines. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon attended McGill University, as did Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Harmonium got its start on Chaume FM. Our community is not a threat to French. We are not the others.
The Government of Canada's proposals capture important demands made by Quebec's English-speaking community during consultations related to the modernization of the Official Languages Act. There is a reason for optimism around proposals to strengthen the role of Treasury Board in the coordination of the Act and expand the powers of the Commissioner of Official Languages to ensure compliance. We also welcome the transfer of the Court Challenges Program into the Act, thus securing this important mechanism for protecting language rights before the courts. There are opportunities for increased support to our community's institutions and provisions for more transparency on federal transfers directed towards our vitality. Proposals that are tempered, unfortunately, by the need for provincial cooperation in our province. Frankly, Quebec does not have a good track record on either front. Centralizing the management and control of health and social services institutions has severely impacted communities' participation in the leadership of our hospitals. Bill 40 attempted to strip us of Section 23 minority language education rights, a fight that continues before the courts. And now, The government of Quebec is floating the idea of placing enrollment caps on English CEGEPs, which will have a direct impact on resources available to those colleges. Quebec has never agreed to binding linguistic clauses or transparency provisions on federal transfers. There is no reason to think it will do so in the future.
We note that the Government of Canada's proposal represent a fundamental shift in the federal commitment to official languages, and the interpretive effects of this shift on Canadians' official language rights is unclear. This is new ground and at first blush could imperil the rights of English-speaking Quebecers down the road. QCGN and the English-speaking community of Quebec are bitterly disappointed that Minister Joly's proposal document did not address the serious problems facing the members of the English-speaking community of Quebec. Our unemployment rate is chronically higher than that of the majority. We have significantly lower median incomes than French Quebecers, and the lowest median income of any of Canada's official language communities. Almost 1 in 5 English-speaking Quebecers live below the poverty line. So the federal government has a positive role to address these realities, and we desperately want the federal government through and your committee to actually recommend to the federal government that they address these issues with the modernization of the Official Languages Act. To not do so would be to tell English-speaking Quebecers, we're going to let you on the bus, but you got to sit in the back of the bus. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
A warm thank you to our witnesses for this presentation, and they've respected their time allotment.
De questions. D'abord,
We're going to have 2 rounds of questions. First of all, a 5-minute round. And the first speaker will be Mr. Dalton. Please go ahead, Mr. Dalton. Thank you very much. Senator, I believe you are a senator. I very much appreciated your comments. We can learn a lot from you. You made a comment about immigration and the importance of the demographic aspect in Quebec. But my question is as follows. Now, Quebec already has the power to control its immigration. So what do you think should be done in addition to that? You said that Quebec should have control over immigration. What more does it need to have more control? Can you hear me? Yes, please. Go ahead. Well, what you raised is quite true. We can hear you, yes. I'm back with my video as well. Thank you. Quebec, as you know, has the right to select its immigrants under the Couture Agreement of 1978. It was renewed afterward with Minister McDougall and is still in effect. What is important in Quebec is 2 things. First of all, immigrants need to be French-speaking. I don't know if you know the Auditor General's report in Quebec on the unfortunate ineffectiveness of French language teaching programs for immigrants. Those responsibilities need to be redefined, or at least how those programs are implemented. The Quebec government, and I'm not being partisan in my remarks here, but the Quebec government has reduced immigration into the province, and it can do so if it does not select immigrants. However, by doing that, Quebec reduces its influence and its relative weight within Canada. So, Mr. Beaulieu, to come back to something you said, when the electoral map is revised, demographics are the basic aspect. The last time it was revised, there were more seats created in Ontario and in the West, but Quebec only had 3 additional MPs, and that didn't really take into account the demographic realities. So the Quebec government decides on the number of immigrants, and it can do that in order to maintain its demographic weight and the ratio of francophones. We're all aware of this reality. In order to increase the influence and weight of francophones in Quebec, then there has to be a movement toward increased immigration and of immigrants into Quebec. Can I just quickly ask another question? I just want to ask Ms. Jennings a question as well, but there's another problem that I see. A lot of immigrants that come to Quebec stay for a little while and then they move to Toronto or Vancouver. I can't actually answer that question in detail, that is, regarding interprovincial migration. How many immigrants come to Quebec and become Canadian citizens and then at some point move elsewhere in the country? Thank you, Mr. Joyal. I just want to ask another question. 15 seconds.
When you came in December, you were asked if the government had consulted you regarding the Livre Blanc, and you said no. Just wondering if since that time you've been consulted, if you've been contacted with, because you made some commentary that time.
At the time when I appeared in December, QCGN had not been consulted.
And have you
However,
been? Yes, okay.
That may have been an impetus, and since then, QCGN has had ongoing discussions with the minister's staff and at times with the minister herself.
Thank you so much. It's over. So the next MP, it's Mrs. Latanzio for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first off, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being present here today. Do know that your input is critical for us. I'd like to start off my questions directed at QCGN. So we often tend to gloss over the reality of the English minority community in Quebec. And I'd like for the members around this table to get a good snapshot of this English minority community in Quebec. And more specifically, if you can give us examples, and I know that you did, Ms. Jennings, in your introductory remarks, but more specifically in terms of their employment opportunities, their medium income, the question with regards to the retention of their schools, factors that will assure the vitality of this English minority community. So if you can just give us a snapshot to the best of your ability here today. Thank you.
We all know, thank you very much for your question. We all know that being employable and being employed is a key indicator and factor for ensuring the vitality of any minority community. Well, guess what? Here in Quebec, the major employer is the government of Quebec. And the drawbridge of that chateau has been pulled up against English-speaking Quebecers. Barely 1% of the public service of Quebec are English speakers. But then we look to the federal government saying, well, maybe we can get our jobs there. Well, guess what? Of all of the federal institutions operating in Quebec that come under the Official Languages Act as it is right now, over half of them, English-speaking Quebecers are underrepresented. Canadian Correctional Correction Services Canada, 3,800 employees in Quebec, 110 are English speakers. And if we look at our unemployment rate, it's higher than it was than the majority population. Our median income is the lowest amongst all official language minority communities in Canada. 18% of English-speaking Quebec lives below the low-income cutoff, compared to 12% for Francophones in Quebec. And primary and secondary enrollment in English schools is down 60% since the 1970s. And yet, our bilingualism rate is 69%, and it goes as high as 82% amongst our young people. So we're graduating, we're educating them, they are fluently bilingual, but when they try to get a job here, provincial government closed the door on them, federal government opened it up a crack. And the proposal of Mélanie Joly, Minister Joly, doesn't even address that issue. And that's a key issue for the vitality of our community. Doesn't address any of those issues.
Okay, so my follow-up question then to you is, and I'm going to ask you to be a little bit clairvoyant here, where do you see this community going in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are some of the biggest challenges that you foresee? And of course, it begs the question, what can we do? What can the government of Canada do to ensure their vitality?
The first thing Government of Canada can do is confirm linguistic duality and the equality of the two official languages, English and French, 1. 2, we recognize and support that French is the official language of work in the province of Quebec, and that it is the common language in the public sphere. We say, get out of our bedrooms and our homes, please, the state. The language that's spoken in the home is the business of that family. The question is, what language are they speaking in the public sphere outside of the home, and what language are they speaking at work? And the overwhelming majority of English Quebecers are bilingual, can work in French, and want to work, but the doors have been shut to us. So unless the federal government addresses some of the key issues that we've talked about, I foresee a very dismal future for the English-speaking minority communities of Quebec, 1. And 2, if our own government, the provincial government, continues to refuse to also address these issues and instead scapegoat us, I see an even more dismal future.
Okay. Monsieur le Président, je vais adresser ma prochaine question.
Madame Latanzio, il vous reste plus de temps. Je m'excuse, le temps passe vite.
Je vais souhaiter que j'ai plus de temps.
I'm sorry you don't have any more time, maybe a little later. 5 minutes now for Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Beaulieu, please go ahead. Good afternoon. I think it was Ms. Jennings who talked about the equality of status. We know that outside Quebec, English is the common language, the language that immigrants integrate into, and 99% of jobs are in English and so on. There is assimilation of Francophones outside Quebec, but in Quebec, it's really the reverse situation. And we know that Anglophones have less funding for their schools and for postgraduate institutions. We know that there are 8.1% of Anglophones in the earlier levels of schooling and even less at the older level. Do you not feel that there should be a better balance? We want English to be maintained as a language, but we don't think that everyone in Quebec should have the right to an education in English. Otherwise, we will have too much assimilation. What is your reaction to that? I believe that the Anglophone community should not be used as a political football to promote identity politics. The education system that is under English control in Quebec, in compliance with Section 23 of the Constitution, is at the elementary and secondary level. And year after year, it is clearly shown that our students get the best results on the mandatory provincial exams at the end of high school. So we have shown that we are able to teach French very well, and our cohort of young people are, over 90% of them are perfectly bilingual. When they become adults, it's up to them to decide what language they're going to study in. I went to McGill. I didn't finish my degree, and when I went back to school in my 30s, I chose the University of Quebec in Montreal. So if I had taken your perspective, I would have stayed with English institutions if I had done my primary and secondary school in English. Well, you are putting words in my mouth. I think that there are English institutions that meet the needs of the English population, and that's a lot more generous than what is available to Francophones outside Quebec. I'll give you another example to make sure that Francophones have the political weight they need in Quebec. We have to make sure that there are proportional linguistic grants and so on. But it's quite understandable that the majority should get most of the funding. We know that many immigrants who come to Montreal then move to English Canada.
French is not the common language for everyone. We certainly do agree it's necessary to maintain Anglophone institutions so that Anglophone communities can continue to prosper. But based on what you're saying, it would be normal for everyone to use English as the shared language. In 15 seconds, please, Ms. Jennings. I think that regarding our Francophone brothers and sisters outside of Quebec, the federal government must do much better than what it has done. And I'm talking about successive governments here, no matter which political party. I agree with you. And QCGN is pleased that the federal government intends to do much more to protect and promote French outside of Quebec and within Quebec. Thank you. Thank you very much. I need to manage the time here, so I have Mr. Boulris up next for the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Boulris. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Senator Joyal. You might not remember, Mr. Joyal, but the first time we met, I was in Cégep in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. And, of course, we talked about, or there were discussions about Lac Meech at that time. I enjoyed your comments on enrollment in Francophone communities and the difficulty to maintain resources in French. You mentioned economic immigration in Quebec, for example, Quebec giving a lot of points for people who speak French. We saw this in Maghreb country immigrants who have come to Quebec recently. What could the federal government do to attract more Francophones to come to provinces outside of Quebec to conserve that critical mass? Thank you for the question. I remember the 90s very well. Perhaps we'll have the pleasure to speak again. In my opinion, the federal government can do many things to attract people from outside of Canada to immigrate to regions where there are Francophone populations, where they are lacking labor in the labor market and critical mass. There are regions where a great number of French professors are needed. Take Saskatchewan for an example. I've recently heard about their situation. There are types of jobs that are identified in those regions as being essential to the vitality of life in French, and I believe that the federal government can do a great number of things to bolster those resources and attract immigrants from other countries. And these countries would be the places where the immigrants already speak French, and then they could, for example, commit to carrying out training or completing training and then use their linguistic skills for a job in Canada. I think the federal government can be much more proactive than it has been in the past. And when you consider amending this act, I believe you should consider amending the preamble, in particular Section 2B of the Act, which says the following: supporting the minorities in general and in Canadian society to foster progress towards equality. Your microphone has switched off. Mr. Joyal, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Mr. Joyal. I think that the Act should be amended to specify much more clearly what the Canadian government's obligations are to foster this equality and to progress toward it. Mr. Boulris, the problem is very simple. If your right to speak French as a working language or as a service user is violated, you can go to the federal court. But if your status as a Francophone is not supported by the federal government enough, you have no option. I just have 1 minute left, Senator. You mentioned something very important: the discoverability of French content on web giant platforms. And during the pandemic, we saw how present those platforms are in our lives. In Bill C-10, do you think that those provisions are sufficient for the time being? No, certainly not. I think Canada should take initiative with the Government of Quebec, as it was done in 2005, to negotiate a treaty for diversity, which was done at UNESCO, for Canada, Quebec, and other member countries of the Francophonie and European countries. And they should all negotiate a new treaty to ensure a discoverability for original French language works on online platforms. Why wouldn't the federal government do that? And why shouldn't Bill C-10 make that mandatory? Thank you very much, Mr. Joyal. I was going to say Mr. Godin, but in fact, the next 4 minutes, yes, they do go to Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will be sharing my time with my honorable colleague from the South Shore of Quebec City, Mr. Blaney. I have a quick question for Ms. Jennings. You said that you were thrilled with what was tabled by the current government regarding official languages. I would like to say to you that I'm not thrilled, and it's not enough to protect official languages. I wanted to share that comment with you because you and I are not at all on the same wavelength. For an example, I like the fact that your organization considers that Anglophones are not a threat, rather, to Francophones. I appreciate that approach. I think that the real issue is the treatment of Anglophones in Quebec, and that model should be used and exported to the rest of Canada. I think that if that is the approach that is favored, Canada will become an even stronger country, especially when it comes to bilingualism. That's the comment I wanted to make to you, and I will now give the floor to Mr. Blaney. Thank you very much to my colleague, Mr. Chair. I would like to welcome you. Thank you for appearing before the committee. We have Ms. Jennings, and we have a former senator, and it is a true pleasure to have you with us. It is a privilege. It was the 40th anniversary of the Official Languages Act, and I celebrated it when I was minister. Senator, you mentioned immigration, but we see Quebecers progressing towards English. How has the Official Languages Act addressed this asymmetry while respecting the Anglophone minority? The Anglophone minority has spoken out against the decline, and it goes beyond the Official Languages Act. You also touched on culture. Could you give us some further details with the time left? Thank you very much for being with us. Ms. Jennings, do you have any comments? Is the question for both of us? Yes, for both of you. You have 1 minute each to answer. Thank you. Well, briefly, Mr. Godin, you have understood that QCGN and the Anglophone communities are thrilled with the proposals in Minister Joly's document. Then that must mean that I didn't express myself properly, because our position is that there are good things in it. We are pleased that the federal government is proposing direct action to promote and protect French and the vitality of Francophone communities. However, we lament that absolutely no measures, no actions are proposed to rectify all of the problems affecting the Anglophone minority community in Quebec. Now I will give the floor. Thank you very much for your generosity. Go ahead, Mr. Joyal. You have 30 seconds left. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The approach to strengthen the use of French must be a pan-Canadian or holistic approach. That means that it must affect all aspects, including the quality of the French spoken, to protecting historical heritage, and to projecting into the future, as well as the use of the iPhone that I was showing you earlier, how these new tools, which are so insidious, and take all of that into consideration. We must consider future generations. In the past, we used satellites and we had 5 TV channels. But now, every aspect imaginable of our daily lives are covered and are within reach at the tips of our fingers. And future generations will have even more. Thank you very much. Thank you for your exceptional contribution to this matter, Senator. For the next 4 minutes, I know how quickly it's going by, we have Ms. Martinez Ferrada. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, 4 minutes. I know it's going to go by in the blink of an eye with our wonderful witnesses this evening. Mr. Joyal, I'd like to come back to demographic decline. Could you speak to us again on that? But before that, I'd like to make a quick comment to what you were saying about Bill C-10 regarding discoverability for Francophone content. I would just like to remind people tuning in and remind my colleagues that our government brought Canada back to what was accomplished at UNESCO in 2008 regarding cultural diversity. My colleague, Minister Joly, contributed to this and took into consideration the digital reality. And they've been working on this for the past years. And I would even invite, and I will ask questions to Minister Guilbeault about this as well, because we know what's happening around the world on that very topic. Now, regarding immigration and Francisation, would you agree with the following? If we're only focusing on working language and not language of immigrants and not fostering immigration channels in the rest of the Francophonie as well as Quebec, do you agree that Francophonie will decrease here in Canada and in North America? What should be happening in Canada and what is missing when it comes to immigration channels? You mentioned teachers, but could you give us any other ideas? In my opinion, there is a glaring need for the government to strengthen its immigration relations with foreign countries. I know that at one time in Quebec, efforts were made in that sense. I think that the same is true for Quebec and Canada, and that is that there is a need for all efforts to be rolled out in consulates, in embassies, and in foreign delegations to try to identify groups that are most likely to appreciate messages from Quebec and Canada and what we are offering here for them. For example, in the hospitality sector, there were many thousands of people working in that area. The government wasn't able to fill the need because there weren't enough workers.
Il y a énormément d'opportunités et on a l'impression que toutes ces opportunités-là qui existent au Québec, comme elles existent également ailleurs au Canada, ne sont pas suffisamment comprises et ne servent pas suffisamment d'arguments pour aller vers ces ressources d'immigration qui existent dans différents pays.
Sénateur Joël, donc ce que vous dites, c'est non seulement il faut avoir des corridors d'immigration dédiés, mais il faut en faire la promotion aussi.
Absolument.
Où on veut aller les chercher.
Et c'est ce que
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Oui, excusez-moi.
Point of order. Yes, Mr. Godin. Chair, I'm very sorry. We had the interpretation in the wrong channel, and I was on the French channel, so perhaps we had a technical error there. I'm terribly sorry. Yes, thank you. So let us check. Is all well now? Is all well? Can we just ensure that the interpretation is indeed into English? The conversation right now is in French, and interpretation should be occurring into English. Could I ask Mr. de Guid, then, are you hearing the English translation, sir?
Problem with translation?
No. À titre d'info, Monsieur le Président, moi, j'ai désactivé la fonction, puis j'entends dans la langue parfaitement sans l'interprétation, là.
D'accord. Donc, Madame la greffière, est-ce qu'il y a une vérification à faire?
C'est encore en anglais.
Ah. On m'indique qu'on a l'anglais sur la ligne en français. C'est ça?
I'm being told that you're hearing English on the French line. Is that correct? Yes, that is what Mr. Godin just told us. Let me check.
Line.
Je suspends donc quelques secondes.
Let me adjourn for a moment. I'm being told that the lines are being correctly chosen by the interpreters in the interpretation booth, so we should be working. I hadn't noticed anything. I'm not sure if anyone else noticed anything. Very well, then. We shall continue. And if there's anything further, Mr. Godin, please do let me know immediately. So we'll return to our hearing. We have 3.5 minutes now of the 4 minutes allotted to Ms. Martinez-Ferrada. I had stopped the clock. Let us now continue. Over to you, Mr. Choyal. As I was saying earlier, I think that the approach the government should favor would be a global one, an overall one, an overarching approach. As you heard during our discussion with the witnesses today, does turn up. It is mentioned here and there in the Act, but it is not formally recognized. Nor is there any reporting provided for in the Act that would constrain the fashion in which the government would take on that responsibility. So that's the sort of thing that I think that you must address. Thank you. Your time is out. And we will now have a 2-minute period, perhaps one question and one answer to Monsieur Beaulieu for these 2 minutes. Yes, quickly then. Earlier, Ms. Jennings, you said that you wanted to be on the bus but not in the back of the bus. I hope this is not a reference to American racism, because we know that Francophones in Quebec have been often pointed out or made to feel guilty because they want to ensure that French survives. And, well, right now I've got to say that Francophones are in the back of the bus and French is losing ground. Do you think that Francophones have a right to ensure the survival of French across Canada and to make of it the common language of Quebec? Mr. Beaulieu, I could not be any clearer than I have been already. You have received our position, the position of the Quebec Community Groups Network. Our network is an ally of our brothers and sisters outside of Quebec, across all of Canada, in the promotion and protection of not only the French language, but also the vitality of French communities. What we are asking for is that you stop using us as scapegoats here in Quebec every time a problem turns up. I think that Senator Choyal has provided excellent points about how to strengthen the vitality of our Francophone communities across Canada, including in Quebec, through immigration, through media policies, social policies, to ensure that the content and the culture and so on support the use of French, but stop using the Quebec minority Anglophone community as a scapegoat and speak to us, address us, deal with us. Well, once again, you're intimidating us. You're accusing me. You're accusing Mr. Beaulieu. We have clearly said that that is not our approach. Please, you have 10 seconds, madam. We have said that we are the most bilingual group in Canada, and this is thanks to our schooling system that we promote, that we share, and that we have ensured the survival of. Thank you. Thank you. The last question, the very last person we will hear from is Mr. Boulris. You have 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Jennings, let me speak to you here. We at the NDP are of the mind that when it comes to linguistic competencies, linguistic rights, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not because one side wins that the other side necessarily has to lose. We know that we can all progress together on this. And I certainly enjoyed your saying earlier something about the special attention that the French fact needs given its minority position in the context of North America. Prior witnesses have addressed the difference between formal equality and real sociological equality on the ground. But you have not mentioned the term asymmetry. Do you think that the French language in Quebec or in Canada is in an asymmetrical position with regard to English, even if we do recognize equality? I think the Constitution is clear on this. Canada has 2 official languages, English and French, and their status is equal. They are of equal status. In fact, we know that French is in a special situation and requires measures to protect it, to promote it, and to ensure that Francophone communities maintain their vitality outside of Quebec, and to ensure that the French fact within Quebec, at work and in the public sphere, remains strong. We recognize this. What we are saying and what we're saying to the federal government here is don't forget that there is an Anglophone linguistic minority community in Quebec that is experiencing problems, and that nowhere in your document are there any measures being put forward to deal with the problems that we are living with on a daily basis and that are affecting the vitality of our communities. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much. This is as much time as we have here today, and in the name of all the members of the committee and in my own name as well, I would like to thank you for having accepted our invitation to come here today, and thank you for your contribution to the study that we have undertaken. So I would like to thank Honourable Serge Joyal, jurist and former senator, and from the Quebec Community Groups Network, the Honourable Marlene Jennings, President, and Ms. Sylvia Martin-Laforge, Director General. It has been a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much, and please do send in any other documents or briefs that we might benefit from reading for the purposes of our study. And to wind up, I would like to thank the whole team that has been with us today, the analysts, clerks, interpreters, and technicians. Thank you so much. And session adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all.